Therapists of Reddit, what made you realize you were treating a sociopath? I worked in a locked inpatient psychiatric unit for 5 years. I saw many things that scared me, but the most bone-chilling patient I ever worked with was a handsome, charming, 35-year-old man we'd call Mark. On our unit, if you told your nurse you were actively suicidal, you were placed on a 1-to-1, meaning you had a staff person assigned to you at all times to be in any room you were in to make sure you didn't hurt yourself. Mark nonchalantly came up to his nurse this particular day and stated he was suicidal and needed an assigned staff personnel. Even though we knew, or so we thought because you can't be 100% that he was lying, we had to provide him with a 1-to-1. I was the only available staff person and was therefore assigned to him. He asked me to walk laps on the unit with him. I said sure. As we walked, he asked seemingly meaningless questions about things like my favorite food or holidays I enjoy. I'm always cautious about giving out information, and I felt his questions were harmless. About an hour into our walking, he commented that he gathered that I cared deeply for others. Then he took his head and smashed it through a glass window. Blood gushed from his face and glass was stuck all over his head. We had to transport him by ambulance to our emergency department. 2 days later, he returned back to our unit, medically and physically cleared. Upon coming back, he came up to me to apologize for scaring me, winked, and walked away. I fully believe he caused pain to himself to put that ever terrible visual in my head and scare me into knowing that if he could so easily hurt himself, he could do the same for others. While one cannot be diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, the disorder most associated with what the lay person understands as sociopathy, until adulthood, conduct disorder is often the placeholder diagnosis given to children who meet similar criteria. While working as a clinical supervisor or clinician at a mental health crisis assessment facility, I had parents who brought in their 6-year-old son. This kid was freaking adorable, soft-spoken, and polite. When queried as to history, the parents remarked that among numerous incidents of animal cruelty and abuse, he had sodomized his new puppy with a broom handle. The injuries were so severe that the puppy had to be put down. That one still haunts me. I hope the parents removed all animals from the household and limited contact since you can't put down a broken child. Psych nurse here. Patient I gained a lot of trust with told me about his person he and 2 others tortured almost to death. I knew the case because it made the news. He went to jail for it. Went into details about the torture. It included making hundreds of cuts to the person's body and giving them an acidic bath. Anyways, his story is that this person raped a neighborhood girl with Down syndrome and it was a payback. This guy was in our ward for about a month, continually threatening suicide if he was discharged. After weeks of knowing him and gaining some form of trust with me, he ended up admitting to me that he made up the whole lie about the rape because he simply didn't like this guy because of an argument, probably drug-related, years back. Too long didn't read. Patient lied about a rape so he could convince his friends to abduct and torture a man that he had some petty disagreement with. Thing is, he stood trial as a minor and threw his mates under the bus, claiming they were instigators, and he simply went along with it. They are still in jail. Great kid during the day, tortured his foster siblings and videotaped it at night. Loved being the good kid in the house during the day and didn't understand why Jimmy would scream and hit so much. Meanwhile, Jimmy was his target at night, but wasn't verbal and couldn't tell anyone. Sociopath was always kind to the verbal child, so only Jimmy was prey. In front of the foster parents, Sociopath seemed like a model teen. Finally, a video surfaced through sheer dumb luck, and now Sociopath is in jail. No one believed it until they saw the video. He's handsome, charming, and will ruin lives because his youthful offender status means he won't have a criminal record. Tip: if someone puts themselves in a victim role, run. They want you to save them. When someone is genuinely overcoming trauma, it doesn't look like that. I am positive that Sociopath will use his foster care history to seem vulnerable and pull in a woman to torment and manipulate. Tip: if someone puts themselves in a victim role, run. They want you to save them. When someone is genuinely overcoming trauma, it doesn't look like that. This is a brilliant point. My dad is a now semi-retired psychologist. Back in the 90s, he was working as the director of psychology for a large housing and treatment facility for the severely mentally disabled. He wanted to get into doing some therapy sessions for non-disabled folks on the side, just to mix things up and stretch his professional wings a little. Our house had a home office wing with a separate entrance, so we decided to start seeing a few patients on the weekends. This plan lasted about 3 weeks before he realized that he'd made a terrible mistake. One of his patients, a very large gentleman, began visibly melting down during a session, pacing around the office and acting increasingly erratic. My dad's thoughts turned to the fact that his wife and 3 kids were now in the same house with a big dude who was clearly unstable. He slowly positioned himself by the door in case the guy tried to bolt for it. The guy noticed this, pulled out a gun, and said, "Don't worry, if I wanted to hurt you or myself, I would have already used this by now." My dad utilized the same skills that he knew from working with violent patients at his main job to talk the guy into putting the gun away. He escorted him from the premises and never saw another patient at home again. My mom was pissed. I've worked with a few. The most disturbing one was an ex-military guy. He served time in Iraq in the early 2000s, and he'd killed in the line of duty. He always seemed a bit off, but the story he told me that was like, holy fuck, he's a sociopath, was when he told me about how he would do things like kill goats because he could get away with that, and some families were there depending on livestock to survive. He also told me about making starving children fight over candy. He talked about watching kids fight to the death with rocks over candy he would throw on the ground. Awful, scary stuff. This person is currently a free man. The second was more of a stereotypical sociopath. He had been arrested for drug possession, and during the arrest attempt had stabbed himself a few times while trying to stab the arresting officers. He was very sharp, but intentionally chose the life of a drug dealer because it was violent. I don't think he ever actually killed anyone, but he definitely abused people pretty horrifically. He dealt meth and enjoyed the power tripping off messing with desperate addicts. He would make them do gross, painful, and awful things to earn their fix. He was also the only antisocial person I'd ever met who had a weakened pain response. He once stabbed himself with a pen to prove to me he didn't feel pain. And I mean like a legit, buried the pen in his flesh, blood everywhere kind of stab. Yeah. Honestly, he made me feel scared and panicky to be in the room. Part of being a therapist is you build a very strong client-therapist bond, and there's a lot of empathy and openness in the room, so things can get quite intense and emotional in a good way. With this guy, I felt like a tiny trapped little animal in the room with a dangerous predator. He had no remorse for his actions. He'd slip in remarks meant to impress or threaten, then look somewhat annoyed when I didn't react, but I was reacting inside. I do not fully recall his name and looks and wouldn't on here anyway, but on the outside he looked totally normal and actually seemed kind of okay. But after talking to him for a while, there was this emptiness that I found quite disturbing. He casually admitted to domestic abuse in the same way someone would admit they left the hall light on by accident. To me, in front of his partner. He never brought it up before, and as a trainee, I should not have been working with DV cases. They would be triaged and referred to someone with specialist expertise. I can't go into details, obviously, for confidentiality reasons, but it was a huge overreaction to an honest accident. It could have happened to anyone, and he literally mentioned it in passing, and seemed to me more like, oh, for God's sake, this isn't even worth mentioning. Why did I bring this up? I'd rather be talking to myself, rather than, I tried to strangle my partner. He just didn't care. I remember nodding and remaining calm, whilst drawing a huge fucking exclamation mark on my notes. I made it through the session somehow, then immediately told my supervisor and had him transferred to a different counselor. I've honestly never been so scared of another individual just from a vibe. Not a therapist, school psychologist. When talking to a student, he casually mentions how he keeps his parents in line by threatening to call ICE to have his mother undocumented deported. He doesn't care about his family in the least, and they have zero control over him. His two siblings are typically developed and are terrified of him. Holy shit, if I threatened this, my dad might get sent back to Mexico, but I would 100% get sent to the ICU. Psychologist who works in a correctional setting here. Yes, I agree with the people who commented regarding DSM-5 criteria for ASPD. I've seen a lot of those. In regard to personal experience, the people that make my stomach turn are unrepentant sexual offenders. I think many sex offenders suffer from a treatable, albeit gross, disease. But I've met with many who try to justify what they did. It happened to me. Rationalize it. It's legal in other countries, and flat out blame the victim. So-and-so's names, parents, should have taught him or her better. I won't debate these people, and I typically redirect them since there's no getting through to people like that. I've also learned I've worked with a sociopath when I figure out I got hoodwinked after the fact. Like an inmate has left my office and I think, oh, what a nice guy, and find out what he's really like from other inmates or staff. This isn't exactly what you were asking, but a relative of mine was given an unofficial diagnosis of ASPD when she was younger. At the time, the doctors told her family that they didn't like to officially diagnose someone that was under 18. As a child, she was extremely manipulative and could go from acting very normal to being stone cold in the space of a moment. Her parents forced her to go to therapy, but as soon as she became an adult, she stopped. Her life now, as an adult, is pretty normal. She is still extremely manipulative, but is also better at hiding it now, so she comes off as charming. She works a normal job, though she usually changes jobs by her own decision every year or two. Her boyfriend seems to only last as long as they are useful for whatever reason as well. I don't think she really has friends though.
Watch our other videos and subscribe cause you not a scrub.